René Descartes raised a question that would be sealed for posterity. To what extent is it necessary to be crazy to reach a reasonable conclusion? There are many occasions in which the ordinary is only the purest reflection of collective ignorance, where the habit does not make the monk but the slave, where the common is synonymous with recklessness, despicable and obscene. How many people called Nicholas Copernicus and Galileo Galilei crazy for defending tooth and nail that the earth revolves around the sun? What would those who blamed and poisoned Socrates think for supposedly corrupting the young Athenians by expressing his ideas against the ancestral gods? How many nations once preserved the absurd belief that 2 men or 2 women who desire each other are sick? With this, I am not stating that the simple fact of rotating towards a different perspective guarantees extracting different lessons, whether they are better or worse, but the differences always come from a rotation of perspective. That is precisely what I invite you to do. Zero in and study with me the bases of Cynicism. More than a school belonging to ancient Greece, it is a modus vivendi that radically touches on what is socially established, both in the past and in the present. Believe me, being a young man so obsessed with planning, a maniac of order, and a faithful devotee of perfectionism, it has not been easy to write these lines without throwing various qualifiers at the parishioners of Cynicism. Now, it would be a different thing to recognize that I have learned nothing from their particular philosophy. Without further ado, let's start the show. The cynical sect was founded by Antisthenes, a disciple of Socrates who, far from adopting the temperamental sobriety that characterized his teacher, used to act in public covered with a bad cloak, a leafy beard, and leaning on a stick. His letter of introduction was the phrase, "Everything for happiness," a value that constitutes the fundamental maxim of his thought. He completely dismissed the comforts of life, riches, decorations, arts, sciences, reputation, dignity. In short, everything that the avid pursues without abandon. In return, the philosopher must accommodate himself to the laws of nature to make decisions about which objects and people deserve our affection and which do not. However, this last principle did not take long to fall into disuse among its sectarians, who chose to get rid of the emotional bond while preserving the rejection of opulence in the interest of achieving happiness as a basic precept. Cynicism reaches the peak of its representation through Diogenes, the anti-philosopher. Antonomasia, having said this, the term Cynic derives from the Greek hyphen, by its translation dog. At the same time, Diogenes means man of God. Therefore, his pseudonym Diogenes the dog comes to mean divine man who acts like a dog. Above all, the native of Sinope completely dismissed the need to use expansive ethical systems, academic confusions, and indecipherable philosophical treatises. A great example of the conceptual simplicity that his speech embodies can be seen in a story that places him surrounded by several philosophers, among whom was Parmenides. With carefully crafted arguments, the thinkers dealt with justifying that the movement does not exist. Diogenes' reaction was none other than to get up and leave the place, thus demonstrating that they were completely wrong without even opening his mouth. Here, one of the essential pillars of cynicism can be extracted. Action surpasses words. Without engaging in metaphysical speculations and abstract contemplations, the Cynic's message aims to redirect human attention towards the here and now. It is possible that he was far above the rest of the thinkers of the time, the pure personification of the Greek ideal, philosophy as a way of life. That Diogenes' project was canonized not with books, but with actions, is the key to its success. His thought was easily accessible to the masses, which is why it gradually flourished in Greece and Rome. A very important detail to keep in mind is that the modern meaning of the word cynicism should not be mixed with the Hellenistic conception. On the one hand, a modern cynic is generally an individual who harbors a negative conception of both human existence and Homo sapiens per se. On the other hand, the ancient cynic limits himself to criticizing humanity as a whole, showing a firm tendency towards vanity, ignorance, or blind obedience. However, the doctrine of Diogenes did not include such vital pessimism, since it alleged that each individual possessed a certain power to transform his life, and in this way achieve freedom, self-sufficiency, and well-being. Once, when someone mentioned to Diogenes that life itself was a curse, the teacher corrected him, saying, "The evil does not lie in life itself, but in living a bad life." When he saw how a banker was being shooed by his respective servant, he stated, "You will not be entirely happy until your servant also blows your nose, which will happen when you have forgotten the use of your hands." In relation to this aspect, it is worth asking what exactly a normal day in the life of the dog was like, because it is frankly interesting. Bordering on the confines of obscenity and frugality, Diogenes considered himself king among all men. To put this in context, it is said that he would sit at a point where two busy streets of the city of Athens converged, since he was forced to beg to be able to eat. His house, if you can call it that, was a flat jar or storage tub in which he kept his only two belongings, a worn cloak and a deteriorated stick. During a summer day, a young man approached him and scolded, "Is it true that you live here in full exile?" To which Diogenes responded, "I am very happy to be exiled. Thanks to this, I began to philosophize. I am prepared for any eventuality." It would be offering a distorted vision of his person if it would lead you to believe that his responses and behaviors were restricted as far as political correctness is concerned. Nothing could be further from the truth. The man behaved in a terribly scathing manner towards the average citizen, and as he confessed to one of his followers, he took his canine alias very seriously. "I flatter those who feed me, bark at those who ignore me, and clench my teeth at those who reject me." One day, he took his nickname of the dog to the next level when a group of wealthy Athenians began to beg him for the bones left over from a banquet. He disrespectfully raised his leg, imitating the animal's posture, to urinate on them. As if that were not enough, the teacher used to satisfy his sexual desires to the not-so-pleasant surprise of the Greek polis in public. When they tried to ridicule him for his practices, they received the same response. "I wish it were that easy to eliminate hunger by simply rubbing my belly." This is just the tip of the iceberg. He criticized the school of Euclid, referred to the Platonic dialogues as a waste of time, described the athletic games as a spectacle for stupid and Dionysian people, and considered the senators as slaves of the populace. He also used to testify that when he observed pilots, doctors, and philosophers, it could be admitted that man was the most intelligent of animals. But he quickly corrected himself when he saw the crowd, and even worse, the fortune-tellers and politicians. He was also surprised that the grammarians dealt with so much suspicion about the evils of Ulysses, disregarding their own. He noted that the musicians would tune the strings of their lyres while neglecting the harmony of their emotional dispositions, that the mathematicians would observe the sun and the stars, but neglect matters here on earth, that the orators would praise justice without ever practicing it, and that the greedy despised money while simultaneously becoming obsessed with it beyond measure. According to the teacher, this is the greatest sin of the people, to label the rich as selfish and vile misers, while they, envious and hypocritical, are the first to wish to be in their shoes. They criticize the wealthy, but then worship wealth and live under a double standard inherent to civilization. A woman who stood in front of Diogenes' barrel to give him a little food said, "They say that you had to leave your house because you were falsifying money." To which he nonchalantly responded, "That is absolutely correct. It is also true that I wet the bed, and it has never happened to me again, mostly because I don't need a bed." Behind the apparent mockery of the preceding answer lies the true key to cynical philosophy. It is said that he and his father used false coins to eat, and when their fraud was discovered, they had to leave Sinope. When Diogenes consulted the oracle of Apollo to find out if he had been wrong, the answer was, "The money is fake." Unfortunately, this testimony was of little or no use to him to resolve his concerns. Ultimately, he already knew that his coins were not legal tender. Years after emigrating to Greece to learn philosophy, he realized the knowledge of the dog would revive his old convictions. The oracle never fell into error. It was at this precise moment when he reinterpreted the previous statement in his favor, not that his money was fake, but that money as a concept already was. According to him, what is falsifiable are not the coins as such, but the collective beliefs, social conventions, and common values prevailing in society. These honors, powers, wealth, comforts, knowledge, and various pleasures make humanity an egotistical, corrupt, and repulsive animal. Wisdom is necessary to glimpse the truth hidden behind money. What drives monetary transactions in humanity is its ability to generate or eliminate desire, pride, fear, sorrow, or enjoyment in economic agents. In other words, what people want is not the money itself, but what they anticipate its presence will bring them. Evaluating the situation in the third person, Diogenes realized that although money circulates from one hand to another and seems to benefit those who accumulate it the most, it only consists of a temporary illusion, a ship without a weather vane, a fleeting mirage that sooner or later will lead to more suffering. According to him, high-value objects had a low price or were directly free, while things less valuable cost much more than they should. Tell me why a statue reaches 3,000 drachmas, while someone who doesn't even give you flour sells for 2 or 3 drachmas. Putting his ideas into practice, the cynical king decided to throw away everything that was in his possession and was perfectly expendable. Once, observing a child drinking with his own hands, he threw away the bowl he was carrying in his saddlebag, announcing, "A child has surpassed me in simplicity." Immediately afterward, he got rid of his bowl when he saw another child collecting lentils and putting them in the cavity of a piece of bread, breaking his plate. In regards to this principle, he repeated 1,000 times to his disciples that no one should cloud you with the speech that more is better. Enslaved by their own ignorance and blindly molding into the same flock, citizens live trapped in a search and capture that will never reach its end. Even in all his material scarcity, the teacher managed to escape from this lifestyle. From the moment he realized the trap it encloses, he rejoiced in his simplicity, lived in complete freedom, and managed to survive improvising. Among his numerous adages, his pro-nature vision of man must be highlighted, according to which the human being is good and virtuous by nature until socialization. Through this process, the individual internalizes against his will a set of norms, values, and customs that undermine his well-being. These artificial social restrictions are conformist forces that turn potentially energetic and independent people into sheep who obey orders they do not even understand. Authentic individuals live according to their own internal laws and ideals, not the pre-established guidelines of society and external demands. The last lines of this passage, reminiscent of Nietzsche, scream his philosophy. Indeed, Nietzsche humorously recognized that the philosophy of the Cynics constituted one of the starting points of his thinking. One of the most prominent anecdotes of Diogenes describes him entering the Athenian market in broad daylight with a lantern, vociferating, "I am looking for a man." Unfortunately, what he sought, self-sufficient, liberated, and buoyant people, was nowhere to be found. Instead, he only saw the prototype of moral decadence, intellectual foolishness, submission to authority, and spiritual cowardice. To illustrate his ideal behavior, Diogenes would point to a mouse running around aimlessly, sleeping without fear of the night, and not worrying about anything humans consider necessary. He urged people to live like mice, assuring them that they would be happy for the rest of their lives. Convinced that the social code leads to misfortune, Diogenes made sure to defy norms, walking backward through the streets, pretending to read a book upside down, or entering plays at their end. He famously said, "You see me as crazy, and I see you the same. In the end, it will turn out that we have something in common." He also attacked those who praised him without practicing cynical philosophy. According to Cato, Diogenes warned that the company of crows is preferable to that of flatterers, since the former devour the dead and the latter devour the living. The best testimony summarizing Diogenes' ethical and moral framework is from Alexander the Great, one of the most recognized world leaders in history. Hearing about Diogenes' events, Alexander decided to meet him in Corinth. Approaching with his usual grandeur, Alexander found Diogenes lying in his barrel with his eyes closed and said, "Diogenes, ask me whatever you want." Diogenes replied, "Get out of my sunlight." Despite Alexander's immense fortune and social acceptance, Diogenes valued the simple pleasure of sunlight over material gain or approval. Regarding pleasure and pain, the Cynic always opts for simplicity, such as contemplating a flowering tree in spring, drinking fresh water on a hot summer day, or focusing on the dynamics of breathing, what we call the small pleasures of life. This mission is challenging because socialization with its unhealthy vices prevents us from fully valuing simplicity. To condition oneself to enjoy simplicity, one must embrace misfortune. Seneca preached that one must submit to a certain regimen, directly facing pain and suffering to recover satisfaction from nature's basic offerings. Thus, Diogenes was often seen walking on burning sand on scorching days, scrubbing in snow at freezing temperatures, or asking statues of emperors for alms. He explained this practice, later embraced by Epicurus, "I am becoming familiar with rejection." Seneca's writings contain a quote that impeccably summarizes the cynical doctrine. Diogenes acted in such a way that absolutely nothing and no one could take away his happiness because he freed himself from the superfluous and fortuitous. It seems as if he had stood up to the gods, rightly boasting that not a single iota of his person belonged to them. Just as the Socratic school, Cynicism in its plural aspects, promulgated that virtue falls on the will of man, and therefore the pursuit of the external has no relevance. In short, there are many similarities between Cynicism and Stoicism, such as their vision regarding earthly sumptuousness and the dichotomy of control. This is because Zeno of Citium, founding father of the Stoic teachings, wrote his works based on Crates, an apprentice of Diogenes of Sinope. In fact, Zeno's initial objective was to adapt the moral principles of the Cynics to an approach that would allow effective cooperation in society. That being said, what conclusions can we draw from the enormous follies or acts of lucidity discussed throughout this short documentary? In my opinion, it all boils down to the following question: what do we really need? I could not resist reading a fragment from Sapiens, a work by historian Yuval Noah Harari, which perfectly fits a discussion about predominant materialism in the 21st century. In it, the Israeli author reflects on the extent to which the things we normally describe as essential are, as Diogenes defended, artificially implanted needs that have little value. The romanticism of the 19th century aligns almost perfectly with the consumerism of the 20th century. On one hand, romanticism tells us that to get the most out of our human potential, we must collect as many experiences as possible, open ourselves to a wide spectrum of emotions, enter into various types of relationships, try different foods, or appreciate different musical styles. One of the best ways to do all this is to free ourselves from our daily routine, leave our familiar surroundings behind, and travel to distant lands to experience the culture, smells, flavors, and norms of the locals. It is very common to hear romantic myths about how a new experience opens someone's eyes and changed their life forever. On the other hand, consumerism states that happiness is directly proportional to the amount of products and services one acquires. Ergo, if we feel that we are missing something, or that our personal situation is not going well, it is very likely that we need to buy a product, a car, new clothes, or organic food, or a service, such as legal advice, relational therapy, or yoga classes. Every television advertisement represents a good or economic benefit that will supposedly make our lives better. The reason why romanticism goes so well with consumerism is the creation of a complex market of experiences that is extremely attractive to the public. Take the tourism industry, for example. Its core activity is not only made up of flight tickets or hotel reservations, but also the experiences lived. What would a millionaire who wants to save his relationship think? Maybe he opts for an expensive vacation in Paris with his wife. This trip is not a reflection of an innate desire on his part, but from the ardent belief in the myths of romantic consumerism. It probably never would have occurred to a wealthy scribe of ancient Egypt to resolve a marital crisis by taking his wife on vacation to Babylon. Instead, he might have preferred to build the sumptuous tomb she had always dreamed of. Just as the elite of ancient Egypt, most people dedicate their lives to building pyramids. Only the names, shapes, and sizes of these change from one culture to another. It may be a chalet in an urbanization with a swimming pool or a brand new penthouse with enviable views. However, very few question the origin of the conceptual structures that lead us to desire the pyramid in the first instance. Although I disagree with some aspects of Harari's text, I think it is very illustrative since it highlights the fact that at least a part of our projections about well-being are determined by the romantic consumerist myth. While I do not dare to ratify to what extent this myth defines the behavior of a specific individual, certain population trends can be detected in general terms. The dilemma with which I would like to end my speech is the following. What fraction of material resources and sensible desires could we do without to increase our satisfaction? What do we really need? This is not about becoming a violent hermit or a full-time Robinson Crusoe. Rather, I recommend imitating the example of choral singing teachers who exaggerate the note so that their students hit the right tone. Perhaps this was Diogenes' purpose, to take things to the extreme so that we are left with something meaningful. After all, if madness is of any use, it is for that purpose, to redefine the spectrum of normality that the term truth has in our vocabulary. Well, you asked Socrates, if the truth does not disappear from our collective unconscious, it is a sign of its existence and that we cannot abandon it. Do you agree with this? I don't know. The time has come to leave. Later, I will return to the agora to think about the truth and its evident nature. Soon we will chat again. Goodbye, Plato. If one analyzes the Platonic dialogues, a clear exponent of the dialectic method, one will realize that most of them end up without reaching a definition that satisfies the initial dilemma of the conversation. This shows that the Socratic attitude implies a continuous review of what one knows and has yet to know. In short, dialogue is not a technique tied to circumstances and whose procedure is canonized through inquiries and presentations. A mentor is not someone who merely transmits a specific type of knowledge to a more or less receptive student, thereby monopolizing almost the entire verbal space. Instead, the subsequent relationship is that of two self-consciousnesses communicating to reach a state of truth higher than the one they would have achieved separately. The exercise of thought goes through verbalization, the putting into practice, the formulation of ideas. This is what ultimately allows the emergence of episteme. Although the Socratic method dates back to the 5th century BC, originally placing special emphasis on ethical and moral issues, it has evolved in various forms and therefore continues to be valid today in a multitude of areas. Among these, we highlight one that has the greatest connection with the usual tone of the channel: clinical psychology. Regardless of the theoretical model of psychotherapy, the implementation of the Socratic method is proposed as a strategy to mobilize and take advantage of the patient's own resources with a view to achieving recovery and improvement. For example, in the cognitive behavioral approach, the subject begins by exposing an irrational thought that generates suffering or an adaptive belief that is strongly rooted in statements like, "I am useless," "I deserve the worst," or "no one can be trusted." In such cases, the therapist could investigate the definitions of the concepts underlying these beliefs. They might ask the patient who they consider to be useful, deserving, or trustworthy. It would be necessary to examine in what situations in their daily life such limiting ideas appear, as well as find out what the patient believes would be the consequences of being what they say they are. When the patient reaches a point where they are incapable of making deeper introspection, the session can be redirected by asking whether there could be alternative interpretations of what is happening, such that they can reconstruct their narrative and vision of reality in a more adaptive way, according to their context and capabilities. Another type of therapy within the existentialist phenomenological models that uses the Socratic method is logotherapy, which is focused on the search for a purpose or vital meaning. In this aspect, work is done on values and perceptions that allow the subject to discover themselves, develop an internal locus of control, and generate alternative routes. Of course, we cannot leave behind the role of the Socratic method in education. My personal opinion aligns with what was mentioned above. A good teacher is not limited solely to presenting in front of the blackboard as if it were a lecture or sermon, perpetrating a verbal autocracy while the rest of the students remain silent at their desks, attending to and replicating blocks of information. Educator involvement is essential. When it comes to building a dialogue that encourages interest, participation, and collaboration among students and with the teacher, the style, whether more or less Socratic, will depend on the topic at hand and what is being taught at a given time. It is worth noting some plural questions and incisive ones that foster this initiative, because you consider this so important that you really want to say who or what might have influenced your opinion. What were your previous assumptions? How did you come to that conclusion? How can you know that what you say is correct? What are the consequences if you are wrong? Is there an alternative to what you are proposing? In this video, I will not delve into the pros and cons of the current educational system, but I am happy to create a separate piece on that topic if the audience requests it in the final comments section. If the Socratic method is to be classified as a great achievement of humanity, it is because it makes logical, epistemological, and ethical inquiry a universal human activity, open to all. It does not require adherence to a particular philosophical system, nor does it necessitate possessing a technical vocabulary or mastering a specialized technique. Instead, it requires common sense from the participants, and importantly, the willingness to admit one's own mistakes in order to grow. I will conclude with a quote left for posterity by the Athenian philosopher. Anyone who holds a true opinion on a subject that he does not understand is like a blind man on the right path.